Picture it. The year is 1817. A revolutionary general has led an attack on Spanish royalists in Chile. The Cinderella opera opens for the first time in Rome. In Ireland, there is the first ever flower show. In Japan, the emperor is abdicating the throne in order to pass it on to his son. In North America, one of the first great engineering triumphs starting in the Erie Canal. The first African American has graduated from a college in the U.S. The New York Stock Exchange has opened, and the first school for the deaf has opened in Connecticut. The Great Seminole War has started. And last but not least, the very final founding father has been sworn in as president. The anti-federalist James Monroe was highly supported by Madison as the Republican candidate and won very handsomely in his bid for presidency. And he brought on John Quincy Adams as his Secretary of State, a name that you will hear again. The Era of Good Feeling was the name of the tour that Monroe went on to start his presidency on a very positive note. And it worked at first. Everybody was excited to see him. Unfortunately, after years of conflict, the economy was in a pretty negative place. And so his popularity was, at this point in time, there was more territory than there were states. So there was a thing called the Missouri Compromise Bill. Essentially, there was a little chaos surrounding and disagreements surrounding the way states were coming into the Union. Some states wanted to be free states, and others wanted to be slave states, and there was a lot of inner arguments in just that topic alone. So the Missouri Compromise Bill allowed Maine to enter into the Union as a free state, and Missouri not so much. But from that point on, this is where the line is drawn from the North and the South. No more states north of Missouri or west will be slaves anymore. But speaking of free, to the south, as in southern border, there were countries that saw what we had accomplished as the United States of America, and they wanted to do the same thing. A lot of these places were territories and colonies from other European powers, and they were ready to kind of take action. Monroe's doctrine, so to speak, was to keep a distance from that stuff, stay neutral, despite the help we got during our fight for independence. But he did send an envoy down to Brazil to kind of check out what was going on there. But people who knew about it saw that more of him supporting their bid for independence. But other people wanting freedom at the time were the Native Americans. In Georgia and Florida, the Seminoles were kind of fighting back and trying to push Americans out of their territory, and it was causing some problems. So of course, Andrew Jackson felt that this was his time to come back, as we've talked about him before, and we'll talk about him again. But he chases Seminoles through to a fort in Florida, and the day after Christmas in 1817, he executes them, including a British lieutenant. That causes a lot of problems. In fact, everyone condemns him, not just in the U.S., but abroad, of course. They were very angry about what he was doing, because Florida was kind of uncharted territory in a way, because both British and Spain kind of had dibs on different parts. And so he kind of went too far, and the president condemned his act as a act of war. So this was very embarrassing for us as a country, But Jackson will rear his ugly head again in the future. In fact, it was such a big deal that Monroe ends up giving back Pensacola to Spain to kind of squash the chaos it would cause. Now, for the financial side of things, essentially, 100 years before the Great Depression was called the Panic of 1819. Real estate plummeted. The values of everything was plummeting. Nobody could get loans. It was a really tough time. And it was a few years of this, and it was really cotton that brought down the entire market. And of course, as everything does, that gave us Europe, particularly Britain, problems with us again. By 1823, Monroe gave a statement when he was giving a speech to Congress, and in that, it is one of the most influential statements given by a president pretty much ever. In fact, it's still referenced today, and that is the Monroe Doctrine. Essentially, it was Monroe saying, Europe, you need to back off. The land over here in North America is land in North America. You've got land of your own. Leave us alone. Of course, he strategically waited until Spain had left Florida in order to make a statement as bold as that. The following year, Cherokee chiefs from Georgia traveled north to D.C. to have a conversation and to plead their case. There was talk and from people in Georgia, the powers that be, that they wanted to move the Native Americans west. You probably have heard this part of the story before. But Monroe, at this point in time, agreed with them. He didn't think that they needed to be moved, that it was their land, and he understood their plight. It wouldn't last, but for the moment, he was with them. And a fun media circus of the day was a very popular and famous philosopher in France came over and stayed for several weeks in D.C. His name was Marquis de Lafayette, and it was like national news, pretty big deal. Other big deal things that happened while Monroe was in office was we got some states, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, Maine, and Missouri all became official. There was a landmark case in the Supreme Court where they decided that states were not allowed to tax the federal buildings and federal government being run in each state. The Military Establishment Act was passed, and that was basically reducing the amount of a standing military in order to focus more on diplomatic solutions. The General Survey Bill passed, which was the way for the Army of Engineers to put together basically better infrastructure for us to get around in. And the Tariff of 1824 protected all domestic manufacturers. So kind of a lot was going on. There was a lot of conflict here in this presidency too, and after this is when Monroe decided to retire, rightfully so. And so if you found any of this interesting, or if you'd like to learn more about our next president, then stay tuned.